Good evening, and welcome to Sleep Sanctuary, where calmness and imagination meet to guide you into a restful sleep. Take a deep breath. Let the world fade for a moment, the noise, the busyness, the weight of the day. Here, there's only stillness and my voice to guide you. Tonight, I'll tell you a story of winter's silence, of a haunting melody, and of a love that lingered long after time forgot it. It happened on a night like this. Cold, quiet, and draped in silver. I had gone walking, drawn by nothing in particular but the need to clear my mind. The air was sharp and clean, each breath carrying the faint scent of snow. After some time, I found myself standing at the edge of a frozen lake. It stretched endlessly before me, smooth as glass beneath the pale glow of the moon. The world around it was frozen too, trees draped in frost, their branches unmoving, the ground beneath my feet muffled by a blanket of fresh snow. It was a world carved from stillness, untouched and perfect. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind, a thin, low hum that seemed to rise from nowhere. But it grew, the sound swelling into something clearer, richer, and altogether otherworldly. Music. A melody so hauntingly beautiful that it sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. It was coming from the lake itself, rising from the frozen depths, though I saw nothing but its unbroken surface. I stood there, listening, entranced and unsettled. Who or what could create music so sorrowful and yet so lovely? The answer, I would soon learn, was waiting for me on the ice. And so, I stepped closer. Before we continue our story, let's pause. Let this moment be one of rest, stillness, and peace, a gift to yourself. Find a comfortable position. Gently close your eyes if you haven't already. Feel the surface beneath you, supporting you completely as you begin to sink into a deeper sense of calm. Take a slow, deep breath in through your nose and let it out softly through your mouth. Let's do that again. Breathe in and out. With every breath, allow yourself to release the tension you may be holding. Now, bring your attention to your body. Start with your feet. Notice any tightness, any sensations there, and with your next exhale, imagine letting that tension melt away. Move your focus slowly upward to your legs, your calves, your thighs. Each breath softens and relaxes your body a little more. Now bring your awareness to your hands, your fingers, resting gently at your sides. Let them grow heavy and warm, releasing any tension. Breathe in, and as you breathe out, allow your shoulders to soften and drop, feeling the weight of the day fall away. Turn your focus to your face. Relax the muscles around your eyes, your jaw, and your forehead. Let your entire face be at ease, as though you're drifting into the soft embrace of sleep. Picture a frozen lake in your mind, a glassy surface reflecting the moonlight, stretching out endlessly. The air is crisp but not cold, and the world is silent and still. This is your place of peace, of deep calm. Breathe in the quiet, and as you exhale, allow yourself to feel lighter, softer, and more relaxed. Stay here for a moment, simply breathing and being. Let this calm linger. The stillness of the night wrapped around me like a heavy cloak, but the melody rising from the frozen lake pierced through it, thin, clear, and impossibly beautiful. I stood there, rooted to the snow-covered shore, listening as the sound swirled through the icy air. It wasn't loud, but it carried in a way that defied explanation. Each note lingered and stretched, as though time itself slowed to let the music breathe. At first, it felt distant, like a whisper carried on the wind, but as I took a few hesitant steps closer to the edge of the lake, the melody grew stronger. It began to take shape, a mournful, yearning tune that tugged at something deep within me. It wasn't just music, it was a voice, a story being told without words. I scanned the frozen surface, looking for its source. The moon bathed the lake in a pale light, turning it into a silver mirror that reflected the sky above. It was perfect, too perfect. There were no cracks, no imperfections, just unbroken ice stretching endlessly. Yet the sound continued, weaving its way through the silence, beckoning me forward. I took another step and then another, until I stood at the very edge of the frozen expanse. The music swelled around me now, no longer faint, but vibrant and alive. It was no longer just a song, but something more, a plea, a sorrow so deep it sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold. And then I saw it. A flicker of movement, a shadow on the ice. My breath caught as I strained my eyes, unsure if what I was seeing was real. At first, it was only a vague figure in the distance, gliding effortlessly across the surface. The silhouette moved with a grace that seemed inhuman, as though they were part of the ice itself. Their movements were slow and deliberate, perfectly synchronized with the melody, as though the music guided them, or perhaps they guided the music. The figure grew clearer as it moved closer. It was a skater, a lone figure dressed in flowing garments that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Their face was obscured, veiled in shadow, but their form was unmistakable. They spun, turned, and glided across the frozen lake, their movements fluid and hauntingly beautiful. It was a dance, but not one of joy. Every step seemed weighted with sorrow, every twirl filled with longing. I couldn't look away. The melody now pulsed through me, filling my chest with a strange ache, a sense of loss I couldn't place. I had no words to describe what I was seeing, only a deep certainty that this was no ordinary skater, and this was no ordinary night. The figure continued its dance, their path carving invisible patterns on the ice, and I stood there, a silent witness to something I couldn't yet understand. The figure moved with a fluid elegance that defied the weight of the world. Every glide, every turn seemed to echo with a quiet sorrow, as though the ice itself whispered the story beneath their steps. I stood still, transfixed by the skater, my breath misting in the cold air, but I barely noticed the chill anymore. As they drew closer, the details became clearer. It was a woman, slender and ethereal, dressed in flowing garments that rippled like mist behind her. The pale moonlight caught the edges of her figure, giving her an otherworldly glow, though her features remained hidden beneath a soft veil of shadow. It was as if the night itself was protecting her secrets. Her movements were precise yet haunting. She twirled with a grace so perfect it seemed unnatural, her arms outstretched, fingers reaching for something unseen. The melody that surrounded her seemed to rise and fall in time with her dance, one moment delicate and wistful, the next heavy with despair. I felt an ache in my chest as I watched, a sorrow I couldn't name but recognized all the same. There was something lonely about her performance, something unending, as if she had danced this way for centuries, her silent story replaying with each winter's freeze. Unable to resist, I took a step onto the ice. The frozen surface held firm beneath my weight, though the skater didn't seem to notice my presence. I moved carefully, feeling like an intruder in her world. The closer I got, the clearer the music became, vibrating through the air and into my bones. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a feeling, a deep, wordless grief. Suddenly, the skater's path curved toward me. My heart jumped as she glided nearer, her figure as light as a shadow. For the briefest of moments, I thought her veil might lift, that I might see the face hidden beneath it, but it remained shrouded. Instead, she paused just a few feet away, her head tilting slightly, as if noticing me for the first time. I froze, unable to look away. She stood still now, her breath rising like faint mist, though I couldn't hear her exhale. Her presence was cold, not frightening, but not entirely welcoming either. It was the cold of forgotten places, of empty rooms where laughter once echoed. And then she began to dance again, spinning away, her arms sweeping through the air like wings. I watched helplessly as the sorrowful melody swelled once more, wrapping itself around her. It was clear now, her dance was not one of freedom but of repetition, as though she were trapped in a cycle she could not break. The realization sent a shiver through me. Whoever she was, whatever she had once been, she was no longer part of this world. She was a ghost, her spirit bound to the ice and the music that carried her sorrow. And for reasons I didn't yet understand, I knew I had been brought here to witness it. The skaters' dance carried on, but now, as I watched, I began to see something more. Each movement, each turn seemed deliberate, as though it held a message, fragments of a story written on the ice itself. The melody, too, seemed to shift, the haunting notes weaving together a tale I could almost hear in my mind. I felt as if the ice was speaking to me, whispering secrets frozen within its depths. The sorrow I'd sensed earlier grew heavier, a weight I couldn't shake, and then, as if summoned by the music, images began to flicker in my mind's eye. I saw the lake as it must have been long ago, alive with laughter and movement. Couples skated hand in hand, their laughter ringing through the crisp winter air. Among them, one figure stood out, the skater. She was not the ghostly form I saw now, but a young woman full of life, her cheeks flushed with cold, her eyes bright with joy. She glided across the ice with effortless beauty, her movements lighter than air. Beside her was another, a man, strong and steady, his eyes fixed on hers. He reached for her hand, and together they danced, their steps perfectly in sync, their joy radiating like the sun cutting through winter clouds. They were in love, a love so pure and deep it seemed eternal. But then the scene shifted. The sky darkened, and the wind began to howl. I saw the two lovers skating as a storm rolled in, the once friendly lake now an expanse of danger. The ice groaned and cracked beneath their feet. The woman, her face now stricken with fear, reached for her lover as he slipped. Time seemed to slow. I watched helplessly as the man fell, his weight breaking through the ice's fragile surface. The woman screamed, her voice lost in the roar of the storm. She dropped to her knees, clawing at the splintered edges of the ice, calling his name over and over. But the lake was silent. The man was gone, lost beneath the frozen depths. The image faded, and I was back on the ice, the ghostly skater spinning before me. Now her dance made sense. It was a memory, a ritual of grief she performed every winter night, reliving the last moments she shared with her love. The melody, once hauntingly beautiful, now felt like a lament, a song of longing and guilt. I understood. She had been unable to save him, and that single moment had bound her here, to the frozen lake, where she danced for him, mourning the love she had lost. A knot formed in my chest as I watched her glide, her arms reaching as though still grasping for the man who had vanished so long ago. Her sorrow was endless, her spirit caught in this cycle of love and loss, unable to let go. And yet, as I stood there, a thought began to form, soft and quiet, like a distant echo. Perhaps this wasn't how her story had to end. The melody continued its mournful rise and fall, a song of longing etched into the cold air. The ghostly skater moved across the ice with her same sorrowful grace, but now I could see the weight she carried. Her movements, though beautiful, were heavy with grief, each step an unspoken plea for something she could no longer reach. I couldn't bear to watch her suffer in silence any longer. Something deep within me pushed me forward, an urge to bridge the gap between her world and mine, to tell her she was not alone. I stepped farther onto the ice, the frozen surface groaning faintly beneath my weight, as though it disapproved of my intrusion. But I didn't stop. The skater's figure turned abruptly, as if sensing my approach. She glided toward me, her movements slowing, her head tilting just slightly, as though she were seeing me for the first time. The space between us shrank until she was only a few feet away. For the first time, I could see her face, soft, pale, and shrouded in a faint glow. Her eyes, though shadowed, held a depth of sorrow that struck me to my core. "You don't have to dance alone," I said softly. My voice, small and uncertain, seemed to ripple across the frozen expanse. "I see you." The skater paused, her hands falling to her sides, her gaze locked on mine. For a moment, the melody faltered, the notes growing faint, as if the ice itself was holding its breath. The stillness stretched between us, fragile yet profound. "I know your story," I continued, my words carried by the quiet night. "I know what you've lost, what you carry. But this isn't how it has to be." The skater's head tilted again, and something shifted in her expression, uncertainty, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of hope. The music began to swell once more, though this time it was softer, less mournful, as though it, too, was listening. I took another step closer, the cold air biting at my skin. "You've danced for him, haven't you? Every winter, every night, trying to hold on to his memory. But he wouldn't want this for you. He wouldn't want you to be bound to this place." A tremor ran through her form, her edges flickering faintly as though she were made of mist. Her hands lifted slightly, trembling, as if reaching for something unseen. The ache in her eyes deepened, and for the first time, I saw tears glisten like frost against her pale cheeks. "It's time to let go," I whispered. "He is gone, but the love you shared will always remain. That's what lives on, not the pain, but the love." The skater stood still, her glowing form bathed in moonlight. Slowly, her hands fell to her sides, and the music began to shift. The sorrowful notes softened, transforming into something gentler, lighter, like a sigh of relief carried on the wind. For the first time, the ghostly figure seemed at peace, her form shimmering as though on the brink of something new. She met my gaze, and though she said nothing, her silent gratitude filled the space between us. I knew she understood. She was ready. The skater stood still, her figure glowing faintly against the moonlit ice. The air felt heavier now, charged with something I could not explain, like the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Her eyes, though shadowed, held mine, and for the first time, there was no sorrow in them. There was something softer, something hopeful. The melody that had bound her to this place still lingered, but it had changed. No longer the heavy, mournful tune that carried centuries of grief, it had softened into something delicate and fragile, as though it were ready to break apart and scatter into the wind. "You don't have to stay here," I said, my voice steady but gentle. "The love you lost, the memory you hold so tightly, will always be a part of you, even if you let go of the pain." She moved then, her feet gliding across the ice, not in her familiar sorrowful dance, but toward me. Her movements were slower, hesitant, as though she were testing something long forgotten. When she stopped just a few steps away, I felt a rush of cold air surround me, as if the ice itself had drawn a breath. "Why do you stay?" I whispered. I didn't expect her to answer, yet something strange happened. The air around us shifted, and faintly, so faintly it might have been imagined, I heard her voice. I couldn't save him, the words echoed like wind through hollow places, carried on the music that surrounded us. Her admission cut through me. For so long, she had danced alone, weighed down by guilt that time could not erase. I took another step closer, the ice groaning softly beneath me. "You did everything you could. You loved him, that's what mattered. He would not want you to carry this burden." The skater tilted her head again, her form flickering faintly like a candle's flame. The ice beneath us trembled, as though her grief was slowly losing its hold on the lake. "Let him rest," I said softly. "And let yourself rest, too." For a long moment, nothing happened. The air seemed to freeze in place, the melody holding its final notes like a breath that could not release. The skater looked down at the ice, her hands lifting gently as though she were reaching for something unseen. And then she closed her eyes. The melody swelled one last time, not as a lament, but as a release, a song of farewell, tender and peaceful. The skater's form began to glow brighter, her edges softening, her figure growing faint. She opened her eyes once more and looked at me, her face calm, her sorrow finally gone. As the music faded, she lifted her arms and spun slowly, one final, perfect glide across the ice. Her form shimmered, the light growing brighter, until it scattered like snowflakes into the night. And then she was gone. The ice fell silent, the world still and empty once more. I stood there alone, the lake's surface smooth and unbroken, as though nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. The cycle had been broken. The frozen lake stretched out before me, quiet and undisturbed. The melody had vanished, leaving only the soft whisper of the wind brushing across the ice. I stood there for a moment longer, letting the stillness settle around me, trying to process what I had just witnessed. The ghostly skater was gone. Her endless dance, her sorrowful ritual, had come to an end. In her final glide, I saw a farewell, not just to the lake that had held her grief, but to the pain she had carried for so long. The release was tangible, as though the air itself had let out a breath it had been holding for years. I turned my gaze upward. The moon still hung high, casting its pale light over the lake, but something about the world felt different. Lighter. The heaviness that had clung to this place was gone, replaced by a calm so pure it felt sacred. The ice, once a stage for her grief, now looked untouched, perfect, a mirror reflecting the stars above. I took a deep breath, the cold air sharp and clean in my lungs. As I turned back toward the snow-covered shore, my footsteps crunched softly, the only sound in this vast silence. Each step felt like a departure of my own, as though I, too, was leaving something behind on that ice, a quiet understanding of love, loss, and letting go. When I reached the edge of the lake, I paused and looked back one last time. I half expected to see her shadow gliding across the ice, but there was nothing. Just moonlight and the quiet stillness of winter. The lake had returned to itself, and in its silence I found peace. The walk home felt longer, though not unpleasant. My thoughts were heavy with reflection, yet my heart felt strangely light. The skater's story had stirred something deep within me, a recognition of how tightly we hold on to what we've lost, believing that to let go would be to forget. But in truth, love never leaves us. It transforms, becomes part of who we are, even after the ones we love are gone. By the time I reached my door, the first hints of dawn were creeping over the horizon, washing the sky in faint hues of pink and gold. The stars had begun to fade, and the world was waking. I lingered for a moment at the threshold, taking in the quiet before stepping inside. As I sat by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, I looked out once more toward the distant lake. It was just a frozen expanse now, its secrets buried beneath the ice. I knew that when winter ended, the lake would thaw and the world would move on. But for me, the memory would remain, a reminder of a story I had been chosen to witness, and a spirit I had helped set free. Rest now, I whispered, as though the wind might carry my words to her. And as the sun rose, I felt it, a quiet farewell, a whisper of gratitude on the breeze. The cycle had ended, and peace had returned.